The sun had barely risen over the ragged docks of Port Royal when a weary sailor, his clothes soaked in salt and despair, offered the last piece of bread he owned to a stranger. The harbor smelled of rust and rum, of broken dreams and forgotten prayers. Yet in that quiet act of kindness, the wind seemed to shift. No one noticed when the tide began to roll differently that morning, glinting with something brighter than foam, silver. The kind of silver that didn't belong to men, but to fate itself. He had been a nameless wanderer of the Caribbean seas, a man who'd lost everything but his will to believe that mercy still had meaning. In a world ruled by greed and cannon fire, where pirates fought for blood and gold, he carried a heart untouched by the corruption of coin. And when he tore his bread in half to feed a stranger, he unknowingly tore open the veil between luck and legend. The townsfolk mocked him, calling him cursed, claiming the ocean would never favor a fool who gave away what little he had. But destiny listens to the whispers of the humble, not the laughter of the proud. That night, as thunder cracked above the masts and rain washed the sins from the pier, the tide came back, heavy and gleaming. Dozens of silver coins rolled gently to shore, clinking against his bare feet like a divine applause. Rumors spread faster than fire through the taverns. The sea rewards the kind, they said, though none truly believed. Pirates, merchants, and broken men all searched the wave for their own redemption, yet none understood what the sailor had done. He hadn't sought wealth, only grace. And in that difference, the ocean had found its reason to give back. Some say the stranger he fed was no man at all, but a spirit of the deep, a keeper of the tides testing human hearts. Others swear the coins were from a sunken galleon that surfaced by miracle. But in Port Royal, they still tell the story the same way. That one man's kindness turned the sea to silver, and that no storm since has ever dared to touch his grave. The morning after the silver washed ashore, the sailor stood alone on the docks, his hands trembling, as if holding the pulse of the ocean itself. The world around him had changed, not because of the treasure, but because of what it meant. Fishermen who once ignored him now followed his every move, their eyes reflecting both envy and awe. Yet, he did not bend to their curiosity. He stared the horizon, where the sky met the unknown, and whispered a silent vow. If the sea had spoken, he would listen. The taverns of Port Royal buzzed with speculation. Some said the coins were cursed, that whoever touched them would drown within the year. Others claimed it was divine repayment, a blessing meant only for the pure of heart. The sailor, however, took neither path. He gathered the coins carefully, placed them into a worn leather pouch, and offered half to the poor along the bay. The act caused unrest. Men accused him of madness, of tempting fate twice. But the sailor only smiled, saying, "If kindness stirred the sea once, perhaps mercy can calm it again." That same night, a storm rose faster than any the town had seen. Waves crashed against the docks like cannon fire, tearing ships from their anchors and flooding the streets with salt and fear. The sailor walked into the chaos without hesitation, clutching the pouch close to his chest. He moved toward the lighthouse, where the flame had gone out, the only beacon that kept ships from shattering on the reef. With the coins clinking like a heartbeat, he climbed the spiral stairs, wind slicing through his coat. When he reached the top, he poured the silver into the brazier, and the flame roared to life, not gold, but white, as if touched by something beyond this world. The storm calmed almost instantly. The townsfolk below watched in stunned silence as the clouds tore open, revealing a full moon that shimmered across the sea like liquid mercy. They called it a miracle. He called it a promise kept. But while the people celebrated, far beyond the docks, a ship with black sails drifted in the mist. Its captain watched the glowing horizon and smiled a cruel smile. "The sea never gives without taking," he muttered. And with that, he turned his wheel toward Port Royal, following the trail of light that would soon lead to blood. By dawn, rumors had turned to fear. The black-sailed ship anchored silently beyond the harbor, its crew unseen, its flag tattered and stained with time. Old sailors swore it was La Sombra del Mar, a ghost ship that hunted miracles. The weary sailor knew its name well. Years ago, before losing everything, he had served beneath its captain, Elias Crow, a man once human, now more legend than flesh. Crow was known for two things: his obsession with power and his hatred for those who defied it. When the sailor had abandoned the crew after witnessing Crow's cruelty, he had taken with him a single compass. A compass said to point not north, but toward redemption. Now, after all these years, the compass had led him back to the one man who never forgave betrayal. The people of Port Royal begged the sailor to flee, to hide before the cursed captain came ashore. But he refused. "You cannot outrun the ocean," he said quietly, "and you cannot silence the ghosts you've awakened." He spent that day walking the shoreline, marking the places where he'd fed the hungry, where the silver had appeared, where the light had burned through the storm. Each mark was a prayer, each step a reckoning. That night, the fog rolled in heavy and thick. Lanterns vanished into the mist as whispers echoed through the town. The first to see the black ship emerge said its hull was scarred with faces. Sailors lost agreed, their souls trapped beneath the wood. Crow himself stood on deck, tall and pale, eyes glowing like moonlit ice. He did not call for parley. He simply pointed his blade toward the dock where the sailor waited. "You stole from me once," Crow's voice thundered across the water, "and now you've stolen from the sea." The sailor stepped forward, unarmed but unafraid. "If the sea has chosen to forgive me," he replied, "then perhaps it's you who stands against its will." The air grew still, and the tide began to pull back, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, the past and present stood ready to collide. The moon hung high, casting silver light across the restless harbor, as if mocking the darkness that had come to claim it. Crow stepped onto the dock, his boots echoing against the soaked wood. The townsfolk hid behind barrels and broken crates, peering through cracks to witness the confrontation that felt older than any curse. The weary sailor stood tall, his shadow stretching long and thin like a ghost of who he once was. Neither man drew first, for both knew this was not a fight of steel, but of destiny. The captain's voice slithered through the night air, low and venomous. "You gave bread to a stranger," and the sea answered. "Tell me, old friend, what will she give me if I take your life?" The sailor did not flinch. "She'll give you what she's always given, nothing that lasts." Crow sneered, unsheathing his blade. Its edge glimmered unnaturally, humming with the sound of trapped souls. The sailor reached into his coat and pulled out the old compass, holding it to the light. "You taught me to steal gold," he said softly, "but I learned to find truth." Then the wind roared, snapping the dock ropes loose. The fight began, not with a shout, but with a whisper of steel. Sparks flew as their blades met, silver against shadow, heart against hatred. Each strike was a memory reborn, nights spent at sea under cursed stars, betrayals carved into bone, and the echo of mercy that neither man could understand. Crow fought with fury, each swing meant to erase guilt. The sailor fought with sorrow, each parry meant to preserve grace. The ocean seemed to rise with them, waves curling higher, as if drawn to the duel. When Crow struck, lightning flashed, revealing his face, twisted, almost human, but not quite. "The sea rewards no man without price," he roared. "Then take your reward," the sailor answered, driving his blade forward. The two stumbled near the edge, breathless, the compass clutched between them. And in that instant, a wave larger than any before broke the dock in two, swallowing them whole. The townspeople screamed, but the sea took everything, ship, men, and silver alike. When dawn came, only fragments of the black sails floated among the calm water. The lighthouse stood silent once more. Yet, something shimmered beneath the surface. Not blood, not wreckage, but light, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat waiting to return. Days passed, and the ocean remained eerily still. Fishermen refused to cast their nets, fearing they would pull up more than fish. The taverns grew silent, the laughter drowned beneath superstition. But one boy, a child who had once received a piece of bread from the sailor, refused to believe he was gone. Every morning he walked to the docks, watching the tide roll in and out, whispering to the sea as if speaking to an old friend. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he noticed something glinting in the sand. It was the compass, battered, cracked, yet still ticking. When he touched it, the needle spun wildly, pointing not north, but toward the open sea. The boy's heart raced. He knew the stories, the warnings, the fear. But he also knew kindness when he saw it. And so, with trembling hands, he set out in a small rowboat, guided by nothing but faith and the memory of the man who had once given everything for others. As night fell, fog surrounded him. The sea whispered, not with waves, but with voices, echoes of sailors long lost, murmuring of choices and consequences. Then, through the mist, a faint glow appeared beneath the water. The boy leaned over the edge, eyes wide as he saw the outline of a ship resting on the ocean floor, its sails shimmering faintly like silver fabric. He could see the sailor there, standing among the wreckage, holding the flame from the lighthouse within his hands, alive, yet not bound by flesh. The boy called out, his voice breaking through the fog. The sailor lifted his head slowly, his face calm, his eyes no longer weary. "The sea doesn't take," he said, his voice echoing like wind across eternity. "She remembers." And with that, he placed the flame into the water. It rose toward the surface, transforming into a trail of light that spread across the waves, reaching the shore of Port Royal once again. When the boy returned, he carried no treasure, no proof, only a glow in his eyes and a story that would outlive empires. The people of Port Royal gathered to listen, their skepticism drowned beneath awe. From that day forward, whenever a stranger arrived hungry or lost, someone always shared their bread, just in case the tide decided to listen once more. Years drifted like smoke through the Caribbean, but the legend never died. Sailors spoke of Port Royal not as a den of thieves anymore, but as a place where the sea itself had knelt before mercy. The story of the weary sailor who gave his last bread became a compass of its own, a moral that guided the lost, a tale whispered by old captains who had seen too much to doubt. Yet, among them, there were always a few who sought not the lesson, but the treasure. One of them was Captain Red Marlowe, a man whose greed could swallow the horizon. He arrived in Port Royal with a crew of cutthroats and a heart full of superstition. "If the sea can give silver once," he sneered, "then it can be made to do it again." The townsfolk warned him. They told him the tide does not obey command, only compassion. But Marlowe's laughter cracked through the air like thunder. To him, legends were maps written in riddles, and he was determined to read them by force. He bribed the poor, bullied the wise, and scoured every inch of shore where the silver had once washed up. For 7 nights, he found nothing but shells and silence. Then, on the 8th, when the moon rose blood-red, he saw a flicker beneath the water, faint, pulsing, and silver. His greed drowned out every warning. "Bring it up," he ordered. The men hesitated, but the promise of riches was louder than fear. Nets dropped, ropes strained, and soon they were pulling something heavy from the depths. When the object broke the surface, the crew fell silent. It wasn't a chest of coins, but a single lantern, the same that had burned atop the lighthouse long ago. Inside, a dim flame still flickered, trembling as if alive. Marlowe grinned. "The light of fortune," he declared, lifting it high. But as he did, the sea stirred violently, waves twisting around the ship like serpents. The flame grew brighter, and within it, a shadow took form. A face they all recognized, though none had ever seen it in life. "The sailor. Return what was never yours," the voice said, echoing like thunder from beneath the waves. Panic seized the crew, but Marlowe only laughed. "You were a fool when you lived," he shouted, "and a ghost now." He threw the lantern to the deck, shattering the glass. The flame erupted, not in fire, but in water, a torrent that swallowed the ship whole. When dawn came, there was no wreck, no survivors, no trace of Marlowe or his greed. Only calm seas, and a single loaf of bread floating gently to shore. Months later, the boy, now older, stronger, and carrying the quiet courage of those who have seen the impossible, returned to the docks. He wore the compass around his neck, its glass cracked, but its needle still restless. He had grown into a sailor himself, though he never joined a crew. Instead, he guided lost ships through the reefs, refusing payment from any man who came to Port Royal seeking silver. "You don't buy mercy," he would say. "You become it." One night, as the wind turned cold and the stars hid behind clouds, he heard a sound that made his heart stop, a low hum, like a melody rising from the deep. The compass began to glow faintly, the needle spinning once again. The boy, now a man, followed it instinctively, rowing out into the open sea. The waves were calm, almost welcoming, as if guiding him towards something unseen. He followed the compass until it stopped, pointing straight down into the depths. He leaned over and saw a faint light below, a pale shimmer, too steady to be moonlight. Without hesitation, he dove in. The water was freezing, yet it felt familiar, like returning to a forgotten embrace. The deeper he swam, the clearer the light became. Not silver, but white, pure and soft, spreading from a cracked lantern resting among coral and shells. When he touched it, a warmth filled his chest, and voices echoed in his mind. Not haunting, but grateful. The sailor's voice was among them. "The sea remembers those who give," it whispered, "but she also waits for those who understand." The man opened his eyes and saw not darkness, but visions, moments of kindness, forgiveness, sacrifice. The sailor giving his bread, the child walking the docks, even Captain Marlowe, his final act one of accidental humility, as the sea took his greed to silence it forever. The man surfaced with tears that weren't from salt water. He understood now. The silver was never the treasure. It was the reflection of what men carried inside. When he returned to shore, the compass was still glowing faintly. He placed it on the dock, beside the old lighthouse, and walked away without looking back. The next morning, fishermen found the compass pointing inland for the first time, toward the village, toward the people. And though none could explain it, everyone felt something shift, as if the sea had turned its gaze not outward, but home. Years rolled by, and Port Royal changed with the tides. Merchants came and went, pirates turned to whispers, and the ocean's wrath softened into quiet memory. But one legend endured, the tale of the sailor, the silver tide, and the compass that no longer pointed to sea. It became more than a story. It became a way of life. Families who once hoarded gold now left bread by the docks for strangers. Fishermen shared their catches with the poor, and every child grew up hearing the same words: kindness keeps the sea calm. Among those children was a girl named Alara, daughter of a shipwright and granddaughter of the boy who had once spoken to the ocean. She had inherited her family's eyes, deep and stormy, like the horizon before rain. From the moment she could walk, she was drawn to the water. She would spend hours sitting by the lighthouse ruins, listening to the waves as if they whispered secrets only she could hear. The villagers often smiled, saying the sea had found its next keeper. On her 16th birthday, Alara discovered the old compass hidden inside a wooden box beneath the floorboards of her grandfather's workshop. The glass was still cracked, but the needle glowed faintly with the same silvery pulse. When she touched it, she felt warmth, not from metal, but from memory. Her grandfather's voice echoed softly in her mind. The sea remembers kindness. Never let the world teach you to forget it. That night, she kept the compass close as she watched the moonlight ripple across the water. But peace in Port Royal never lasted long. One fateful morning, strange ships appeared on the horizon, dark silhouettes flying the flags of foreign empires. They came not for trade, but conquest. Cannons were rolled onto the shore, soldiers marched through the streets, and the people trembled under the boots of men who spoke no kindness at all. The invaders demanded treasure, and when told there was none, they laughed. "Then we shall take your silence as payment," their captains said coldly. Alara felt fury rise in her chest. The sea had always answered mercy, but could it hear injustice too? That night, under the veil of storm clouds, she climbed to the top of the ruined lighthouse, the compass in her hand. The wind howled, the waves churned, and thunder cracked like cannon fire in the distance. She raised the compass high and shouted to the sea, her voice trembling but fierce. "If you remember kindness, then remember us now." The needle spun violently, and the air around her began to shimmer with light. The storm came faster than any sailor could have predicted. The invaders' ships, anchored smugly in the bay, began to pitch and groan as monstrous waves rose from the deep. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of men who had mocked the sea. From the cliffs, the people of Port Royal watched in awe as the ocean they feared became their guardian once more. Alara stood at the lighthouse peak, rain lashing her hair, the compass burning like a star in her palm. She could feel the pulse of the tide beneath her feet, ancient, powerful, alive. In her mind, she heard the voices of those who had come before, the weary sailor, the boy, the man who dove into the depths. Their words intertwined like wind and water. The sea does not punish. It restores balance. With each flash of lightning, the ships of the invaders cracked and splintered, their cannons silenced by the roar of the waves. As the tempest raged, Alara's strength began to fade. The compass grew heavier, its light too bright to look upon. She understood, then, that every miracle demanded a keeper, and every keeper a price. Her knees trembled, but her spirit did not. She whispered a final plea, not for vengeance, but for peace. "Spare them," she said softly, "but let them remember." The sea answered. The storm eased, the waves calmed, and the remaining ships drifted away, broken but alive. When dawn arrived, the people of Port Royal found the lighthouse standing taller than before, its stones somehow renewed. But Alara was gone. Only the compass remained, resting at the top step, glowing faintly under the morning sun. The villagers knelt, weeping not from sorrow, but from awe. They knew the sea had chosen its guardian, and she had answered with her soul. From that day on, whenever the wind turned cold and the tide rolled in silver, the people said Alara was near, watching from the depths, keeping the balance between mercy and might. And though her name faded with time, the tradition remained. Before every voyage, a loaf of bread was left on the docks, not for luck, but for gratitude, a silent promise to the ocean that had once turned kindness into legend. Decades passed, and Port Royal became a place of peace once more. The world beyond it changed. Empires rose and fell, kings turned to ghosts, and the age of pirates sank beneath history. Yet the scene near that harbor remained unlike any other. Sailors swore its waters gleamed faintly at dusk, as if touched by liquid silver. They called it the Silver Horizon, though few dared to cross it. Legend said those who set sail without pure intent would lose their way forever, their compasses spinning into madness. But one man, a scholar named Nathaniel Gray, arrived determined to uncover the truth. He wasn't a sailor or a pirate, but a seeker, one who believed every myth hid a fragment of history. He studied old journals, fragments of ship logs, and the faded murals carved into Port Royal's chapel walls. The same symbols repeated again and again, a loaf of bread, a flame, and a compass glowing beneath the sea. If these are metaphors, he mused, then they point not to treasure, but to transformation. The villagers watched Nathaniel with quiet curiosity. He was polite, gentle, but restless, a man haunted by questions the world had stopped asking. One night, as he walked along the moonlit shore, he saw something strange. The tide rolled in heavier than usual, and between the waves, he caught sight of a figure, a young woman, pale and calm, standing atop the water as if it were glass. Her eyes shone like stars, and her hair flowed with the tide. "You seek truth," she said, her voice echoing like song. "But truth is not found. It is remembered." Nathaniel fell to his knees, unable to speak. The woman extended her hand, and in it appeared a compass, cracked, glowing, familiar. "The sea keeps what men forget," she whispered. "Take this and listen." When he touched it, visions surged through him. The sailor's kindness, the boy's courage, the girl's sacrifice. He saw generations connected not by blood, but by acts of mercy that echoed through time. When the light faded, the woman was gone, but the compass remained, warm against his chest. Nathaniel spent the rest of his life recording what he had seen. His writings became the chronicle of the Silver Tide, a book that spread across the world, retelling the story not as legend, but as proof that compassion leaves ripples stronger than storms. And though skeptics dismissed him, sailors who crossed the Caribbean swore that when they acted with kindness, winds favored their sails, and that sometimes, when a moon was full, they heard a woman's voice whisper, the sea remembers. Centuries later, Port Royal no longer appeared on most maps. The sea had claimed much of its coast, leaving only a quiet crescent of sand where the old lighthouse still stood. Tourists passed it without knowing, unaware that every stone beneath their feet carried a story older than any empire. Yet when storms gathered far from shore, the locals noticed something peculiar. Lightning never struck that bay. The water there always shimmered faintly, even on moonless nights. On one such evening, a young woman named Isla wandered along the shore, drawn by an inexplicable pull. She was a descendant of Nathaniel Gray, though she didn't know it. All her life, she had dreamed of waves whispering her name, of a voice calling her toward the sea. That night, the tide was low and half buried in the sand. She found a familiar shape, a compass, tarnished but still glowing faintly beneath the glass. The moment she touched it, the ocean grew still, and a faint melody rose from the deep. Visions flooded her mind, faces of people she had never met, bound by the same mercy that once changed the tide. The sailor, the boy, the girl, the scholar. Each smiled at her in silence. She felt warmth bloom in her chest, followed by understanding. She wasn't meant to find the story. She was meant to continue it. The sea's gift was not silver or glory. It was remembrance, a reminder that kindness, like the tide, always returns. Isla rebuilt the lighthouse, stone by stone, guided not by maps, but by instinct. When she lit its flame, it burned the same white fire that once defied storms. Ships began to reroute near Port Royal again, not for treasure, but for safety. Fishermen said the sea near the harbor grew calmer, its waters clearer than anywhere else in the Caribbean. Some swore they saw a figure standing beside the flame, a woman in silver light, watching with eternal calm. And so, the legend endured, reborn with every act of compassion, every hand that gave instead of took. They say that when a sailor shares his meal with another, when a stranger helps a stranger, the waves carry their names into the depths. And there, the ocean keeps them, forever unforgotten. For in the end, the sea's greatest secret was never about silver or storms, but about a promise made long ago, that kindness, once given, never truly sinks. It simply finds its way home. The sea, through centuries of silence and song, had spoken the same truth to every soul who dared to listen. That mercy is not weakness, and compassion is not loss. From the weary sailor who gave his last bread, to the child who believed in miracles, to Alara who offered her very spirit to protect her people, and Isla who reignited the light of Port Royal, each carried the same flame forward, a legacy of kindness that not even time could drown. The ocean had been their witness, their mirror, their confessor. It had never asked for riches. It had only ever asked that humans remember what it means to give. And perhaps that is the secret hidden beneath every wave, that the world does not reward the greedy, nor the cruel, nor those who demand from it. It listens, instead, to the humble heart that gives even when nothing remains. The sea in this story was never a god nor a curse, but a reflection of human nature itself, unpredictable, vast, and capable of both destruction and beauty. Every storm that raged was a reminder that balance is restored not through force, but through grace. So when you think of Port Royal, do not imagine gold or ships or battles lost to the deep. Think instead of the hands that shared bread, the voices that whispered prayers into the wind, and the light that kept burning through centuries of darkness. That light was never trapped in a lantern. It was carried in hearts that refused to forget the power of goodness. The tide that once returned with silver was not a miracle of nature, but a response to a single act of love. And that act, however small, became immortal. Maybe we all live by our own sea, the unseen force that watches our choices, that answers not with words, but with consequences. The waves that rise and fall in our lives might not bring treasure, but they will always bring back what we send out. If we cast out anger, the storm will return. But if we cast out kindness, even a single crumb of mercy, the tide will one day bring it back, multiplied, transformed, and eternal. That is the true law of the sea and of life itself. So before you go, take a moment to let the story sink in. If it moved you, Share it, not just with a click, but with someone who might need its reminder. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what the tide spoke to you. And join this voyage by subscribing. Because somewhere, out there beyond the waves, every story of kindness still finds its way back. And together, we keep that light alive.